Hello, Washington, D.C. How are you today? Good. Hey, how are you today? Very good. Okay, I'm going to slow things down. Isn't that a nice way to start a 3-day conference? I'm going to slow things down. We don't really like slow, do we? Slow is weird. We don't like slow. I had a phone. It fit my hand so beautifully. I loved the form factor. I didn't want to buy a new phone. I didn't see the need to spend the money, but my phone was too slow. It was fast when I got it, but now it was slow and it wouldn't run the software, so I had to replace it. Okay, and our movies are faster. You watch a classic movie, there's maybe 3 edits a minute, and you watch a modern movie, there's like 300 edits a minute because our movies are faster. Our politics are faster. People used to make speeches, now they write tweets. Everything's faster now. Our sites are fast, our sites have to load fast or people will go somewhere else. We all know that, right? So fast is good and slow is bad most of the time, but maybe sometimes slow is okay. Now, prison wine is made quickly in a toilet bowl, and it's generally not the best wine. Wine that is made in a cask and they take years making it is generally considered better. And slow courtship tends to produce a relationship that lasts. If you fall in love super fast and get married right away because it's so romantic, I've read that you might end up divorced. So these things can happen. A long, slow bath is nice. A long stretch after a workout is probably better than rushing out of the gym, right? Taking it easy, taking a bath, a sauna, coffee. There's all kinds of arcane hipsterism to coffee, and the longer it takes to make your coffee in the morning, the hipper you are, I believe, right? Right, I'm sure there are people who are staying in this hotel who are going, I'm not going to use a Mr. Coffee. Heaven forfend, right? But slow brewed coffee tastes better. Slow bacon makes good eating, not bacon like from a pig, baking. Slow bacon makes good eating. It's an Amish expression, slow things. And one of the things that we really like that's slow is reading, right? Reading when we read for pleasure or when we read to learn, we tend to read slowly. And there's a reason we read slowly. First of all, reading is a fairly new invention and it's completely unnatural. It ain't natural, right? First of all, speech itself is a hack. Jeremy Keith, who is a frequent event apart speaker, says that speech is this hack where I have a brain picture and I want to put that in your brain, so I make throat sounds. And you hear them and then you get a brain picture. Well, reading is even more abstract than that because it's squiggles. So Charles Dickens is sitting at his desk and he thinks, oh, poor Oliver Twist just wants more gruel. He has that picture in his mind and he makes some squiggles and he sends them to his editor and they get published. And well, I think he was his own publisher, but anyway, eventually, someone looks at those, a shopkeeper who's worked very hard that day, sits and reads Mr. Dickens' squiggles and goes, oh, poor Oliver Twist, he just wanted more gruel. That's an amazing hack, but it's not natural. We are, I believe, the only species that can do it. I have cats. I'm sure they're much smarter than me. For one thing, they don't have to work, but I don't believe that they can write. If they do, they're keeping it really quiet. So reading is a slow experience because it's unnatural, and we start learning it at like age 3, 4, 5, and it's very hard, right? Kids have trouble learning to read. Really smart kids can have trouble reading. It's not a test of intelligence. It's just, does your brain work a particular way? And all of us, when we're trying to enjoy reading, slow down. And I'm going to come back to this in just a second. But so basically, fast is better for most of the design that we have to do most of the time. Most of us, most of the time, about 80% of the time, we're making web or digital stuff so somebody can do something, right? so they can sign up for a newsletter, so they can check a box saying which health insurance program they want, so they can register for a class or not register for a class, right? Register for a different class. We're making stuff so people can get things done. Most of what we do is commerce, bless you, of one sort or another, right? Sales of one sort or another, even on a nonprofit. Basically, we want you to care about water in a country where the water isn't clean, so you'll donate, so you'll help. So even a nonprofit is selling something. And most of what we do is some kind of sales, is some kind of transactional design. And when our goal is to help someone make a transaction, we need to make it fast, because fast is the way to go, because conversion is about speed of delivery minus friction. Conversion, I'll say this again, I didn't make a slide for this because I want you to pay attention. So you have to write this down on Twitter or something. Conversion is about speed of delivery minus friction. In sales, time is the ultimate friction. Didn't make a slide for that one either. Time is the ultimate friction. And that's why 80% of the time we have to do this. We have to work to make our site experiences, our digital experiences faster for the customer, not just optimization, right? A lot of times, we're pretty good these days, most of us, about thinking about, can I make this load faster? Do I need every line in this script? Can I simplify my CSS so it loads faster? Can I lazy load my images? We're pretty much aware that our site has to be faster, but it doesn't have to be faster with the wrong stuff. It also has to be faster with the right stuff. If we make our site super fast and it gets the wrong result to the customer faster, we haven't really made a good user experience. The customer needs to get the information they came for, right? If I need an operation and I'm not sure if I'm insured or not, and I want to check your website, I don't really need a story about your founder. I don't really need to learn about how the company was established on the banks of the Mississippi in 1846. I mean, sure, have that somewhere on the site if you have that. But mainly I want to know, is my insurance going to cover my operation or not? And the faster you provide that information, the faster you provide the correct information, the better I'll feel about you. And if you don't optimize the speed of delivery of the correct information, which I made up some words, I call it the content performance quotient, because it sounds business-like, so it'd be something you could tell your boss. Well, our speed optimization is good, but our content performance quotient could be improved. They'll be like, okay, carry on, sounds good, right? But it's the speed of relevancy. How quickly can you get the right content to the person who needs it? And that's hard because every web page, it's very rare that it's only in a certain part of the conversion funnel where you're basically, at this point, you're just showing guitar picks. Because at this point in their experience, they're just going to buy a guitar pick. Usually, you're in some earlier part of the funnel where the person where you have to satisfy maybe 50 different people. So 50 different people are coming to your homepage, they all want something different. You have to get everyone to what they want as fast as possible and help the site has to figure out what people want in just a few clicks, and that's really hard. That's 80% of what we do. That's service-oriented design. It has to be super fast, and if you're interested in that, I gave a talk about it last year. This is really part 2 of that talk, but this is the slow part. So the fast part was for the 80%, where we're removing friction, the friction of the wrong content, the friction of slow speed, right? Time is the ultimate friction. So if you're interested in how to speed up the experience for the 80% of design you do that's transactional, talked about it last year, and you can watch it on our website. And the beautiful thing about that is you can watch 40 hours of videos on our website, all talks like this. You don't have to go to our show to see them. And you don't have to register. You don't have to give us, there's no password. You don't have to give us your email address. We're not going to sign you up for anything. We believe in the open web and believe that information should be out there. So first, if you want to experience it live, you pay. But if you don't want to experience it live, you want to see it later, or you missed the show, you watch it for free and you don't give us anything. And we think that's a pretty good deal. Anyway, enough of that. Fast is better for customer service designs. for 80% of what we work on, but slow is best for comprehension. If we're concerned about ideas, if we want people to understand, we have to slow things down. If comprehension is the goal, you have to slow down the user experience. Again, that's for 20% of what we do. But it's a pretty interesting 20%. You're like, okay, Jeffrey, that's great. I have to slow people down. Well, how do I do that? I'm so glad you asked. Welcome to this talk. This talk is about how you slow things down. And we're going to start by going back to that childhood experience of reading, like figuring out how to read a book and memorizing information maybe for a test and just going really slowly, taking notes, underlining, highlighting, all the stuff we do when we're trying to learn something with a book. Okay? Book reading. And book reading is about readability. Book design is about readability. Readability is not just legibility. Legibility means it can be read. Readability means it wants to be read. One is seduction, one is table stakes, right? Readability is seduction, legibility is table stakes. Sadly, we suck at table stakes. A lot of our websites are hard to read just in terms of bare legibility, right? We don't always get to control the width of our columns. We don't always get to control the size of our type, or we overly control it and impede a reader with special needs from reading at the size that they want. We have sites that used to be about content where we now have so much clutter. I call it info junk. So Tufte has this thing he calls chart junk, right? Any of you taken a Tufte class or read a Tufte book? Tufte talks about chart junk, which is where you're doing information design and you have some stuff that's kind of pretty that the designer really likes, but it actually impedes comprehension. It's the extra stuff your design didn't really need. That's chart junk. And so being a totally original human being, I stole that idea and I apply it to info junk. Info junk is all the stuff on the web page that's extraneous to what the customer needs, right? Info junk. Ads, pop-ups that get in front of the content saying, sign up for our newsletter. Yes, I'd like to sign up. No, I'm a serial killer and I hate babies. You know, those things, those lovely things that we do. Please sign up. I'd like to keep informed. Sign me up for your exciting newsletter. No, I hate life and everything, sunshine and flowers. No, okay. We have all this junk, info junk on our pages. And this has been a bigger and bigger problem for years, and we really started paying attention to it around 2007 and becoming desperate about it around 2011, right? We used to design for absorption. The sites that a lot of us fell in love with when we first fell in love with the web and decided to make it our career were like a personal blog or, oh my gosh, I can read National Geographic online. I can read the news online. I don't have to hold that messy newspaper with that newsprint that gets on my fingers and then the schmutz gets in my grapefruit and then I'm sad. I can digitally read the newspaper. And I'm sitting there with my cornflakes in front of my monitor, right? My 600 by 400 monitor in 1999 going, this is the best of all possible worlds. We fell in love with content. A lot of us in this room really like reading, really like content. It's one reason we became designers. Coders like content. We like words and characters in front of us. We'd like to spend as much time as possible in front of a monitor, not interacting with other humans, right? So we like that stuff. And then we end up making these pages that are full of info junk, and that's sad. Now we're designing pages that don't necessarily have to have info junk. In fact, info junk may be getting in our way. We have to design for absorption, not conversion. When we're designing content, we're not necessarily evangelizing. We're not trying to persuade someone. Sometimes we are. Sometimes the author is. But mainly what we're doing is trying to make an experience that people can learn from, that they can slow down and understand. Okay, so let's talk about readability. Readability as opposed to legibility and how we get there. And one of the first ways we can talk about it is to talk about an app called Readability. Around 2011, around the same time, Kindles were popular, iBooks were popular, and the tablets were out, and Apple had just introduced the iPad. And the first thing everybody did was say, oh, what a terrible name, it'll never sell. Remember that? If anyone was alive and adult then, remember like on social media, you're like, oh, what a stupid name, that'll never work, Apple's really lost it. Okay, so it's around this time, a lot of designers are becoming frustrated with these cluttered pages we have to make with spyware and ads and pop-ups and all kinds of other junk. And we're thinking, what can we do? And this company in New York called Arc90, run by a fellow named Rich Ziotti, they make this piece of software called Readability that sits, just like a screen reader, sits between a user and the web page and helps them interpret the web page. Maybe a user with low vision or some visual impairment has a screen reader to help them. Well, readability is like that, but it's working with a conceptual impairment, the conceptual impairment of a badly designed page. It removes all that clutter. And they make it and they give it away. It's open source. They say, hey, we just spent $250,000 of our own money developing this app. It's open source, it's free, have a nice day. And Apple, a billion-dollar company, says, why, thank you very much, we'll take it. And they put it in their Safari browser, and it's the reader view in Safari. Okay, so the reader, anyone who uses Safari, anyone who owns an iPhone, you're using Safari. If you switch to reader view, you're basically looking at Readability 1.0. There was also a Readability 2.0, which used Hefler fonts for a really beautiful experience, and which apportioned, it kept track of what you read so it could give money to the authors that you read. It actually was a payment model for authors, but that rubbed some people the wrong way, particularly a very prominent blogger, and Readability is no more. This one blogger was so powerful that when they said, this is a terrible product, it basically killed it, so that was sad. But before that happened, I was on Readability's advisory board, which basically means I would get to give my opinion, which is my favorite thing, which may be why I'm standing here doing it for an hour. It's like, and it could be anything. It could be leaf pickup, forest fires in California. I have some thoughts about that. I would like to share them with you for as long as you'll let me. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I don't really want to be the loudest voice in the room. I don't want to, but I'm this little kid that's really eager to share thoughts. I'm like I'm Hermione. Basically, I'm Hermione Granger, always have been. So not so much in the hard work, but definitely in the raising of the hand, pick me, sad. Anyway, let's go through this readability experiment. Here is a typical modern web page. This is not an ugly page from 1999 or 2003. This is an ugly web page from now, and it's a very typical one. I'm sitting at my desk, eating my sad lunch, and instead of staring at the screen doing my work, I'm going to take a few minutes and stare at some viral content or some clickbait content like, oh, worst acting performances ever. That sounds like it's fun. I can sort of feel superior to these very wealthy celebrities while I eat my 7-Eleven egg salad sandwich. Yeah. All right, so I go there, and where's the content? This is the content, right? This is what they're showing me. This is what they're giving me. So I've got all this misinformation, all this info junk to look at, and through readability, in the guise of the Safari reader mode, I just get it down to a picture and some words. Okay, so that's Safari. This is the Chrome browser, same page, and the Chrome browser doesn't have a built-in, because Google didn't say, Arc90, spend $250,000 on some stuff and give it away free so we can take it. Google was like, we don't need it. We don't mind if people look at ads. And so, but you can use this Mercury Reader, and the Mercury Reader gives you a book-like experience. And the Mercury Reader is by the people by Arc90, same people. Their readability got killed, so they made the Mercury reader. And they also changed the name of their company. Funny story, somebody bought them, and then after 3 months, the people who bought them said, we don't know what to do with you. You guys can walk. So they walked. He said, so can we keep our company? Yeah, sure. You don't own us anymore? Well, we own the name. We did spend $30 million. Let us keep your name. Okay, we'll change our company name? Yes. So they're now called Postlight. Same company. They walked away. They got $30 million to do nothing, which I've been trying to get that gig. It is difficult. But anyway, so here is the Mercury reader, and if it looks familiar, it's because it takes its cues from Kindle and iBooks. And where do Kindle and iBooks take their cues? From the book. And so here we go. It's 2011. The tablets are out. The iPad is exciting people. People are frustrated with all the info junk. They're frustrated with the bad layouts they're being asked to make, especially when they have content pages. And into this comes Craig Maud. And Craig Maud is a non-Japanese designer who lives in Japan, who writes this article for A List Apart, and it's called A Simpler Page. And Craig hypothesizes that there are basically 3 ways we interact with a book, and those are the same 3 ways we're going to be interacting with the iPad. He writes about the iPad not because it's the best thing, but because when Apple makes something, if Apple says the sky is blue, people are like, leave it to Apple, man. I thought it was red, but they told me. It's just a phenomenal thing about their brand, that even if they make something that someone else has already made, it seems like an innovation. And to be fair, they will usually do something spiffy when they do it, but that's not really the point. So Apple has come out with the iPad. It's 2011, 2012. Responsive design is already underway. We're thinking about pages are elastic now. Maybe they're not pages at all. We're starting to think about design systems and that kind of design thinking. So there's a big revolution happening in design. And in that ferment, Craig comes out with this article where he says there are 3 positions we hold books in, and we have different responses depending on how we're holding them. There's bed, which if you're Craig, means you're lying on your flat little tummy with the iPad propped up on a pillow. Or if you're me, you're lying on your back. And I lie on my back to read, and I used to do that with paperbacks, and then when I would fall asleep and they'd hit me in the face, it wasn't really a problem. But the original iPads were pretty heavy. They were like 3 pounds, and so I'd come in the next day with like a bruised nose and a black eye, and they'd say, what does the other guy look like? And I'd say, looks like my iPad, which was sad, but I felt kind of rugged too. You think I'm just some nerd. No, I've been wrestling with iPads all night. But okay, so that's bed. Bed is intimate. You're reading, but partly you're also putting yourself to sleep. Knee is interesting. Knee is a medium position. It's where something is at your knee, or it's here, and this is where you concentrate and also are very relaxed. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. And the last position Craig wrote about was breakfast. This is historical. Kids ask your parents, but people used to have a thing called a newspaper, and they would sit and hold it like this while they ate the cornflakes. And that's a position in which you hold something and you kind of hold it at bay. You hold it at a distance, and it's a form of relaxed reading. When I was a kid, I read cereal boxes. I didn't put them up to my face. I held them back like that because I didn't need glasses then. And so there's a relaxed form of reading where it's at a distance. Okay. So again, bed and knee. Now the thing about knee, around the same time, I've had a phone now, 2011, 2012, I've had this phone in my pocket for a few years now, and something has changed about the way I'm constantly on call. Used to be, if I had to work during family time, it meant I had to get up and go to a computer and sit there. And I would scrunch forward with my shoulders like this, and I'd be typing, and I'd be resentful, like, why do I have to work? It's family time. But then a magical thing happened. These devices came out, and now I could sit with a device on my knee during family time and go, oh, I gotta answer that email, but that's okay. It's family time. And I would do the same work that I would have done at the computer, but I felt more relaxed about it. It seemed like less of a hassle. Has anyone had that experience where you're doing just as much, round-the-clock work as you ever were, but it doesn't seem like quite as much of a hassle because you're doing it on a tablet while at the same time laughing at the TV show with your family, right? You've got your brain in two places at once in a way that you can't when you're scrunched up in front of the computer. So that's what I was thinking about, and I put all these thoughts together in my head in my own way, and I said, so maybe if we want to make a design that encourages people to relax, and by the way, I was also at the same time just starting to do yoga, and my yoga teacher said, if you put your shoulders back, you'll relax. I was like, that's the most ridiculous, oh. That doesn't make any, oh, and like, I noticed that here's work, anxious, and here's yoga, just like, oh, yeah, like standing upright. Oh, it feels pretty good. And so I don't know if there's a science to how our bodies are positioned influences how we take in information, but my anecdotal experience is that how my body is positioned influences whether I take in information, whether I'm anxious and barely comprehending what I'm reading because my brain is racing, or I'm actually sitting back and contemplative and I'm taking it in. I decided that there was something to it, whether it's scientific or not, and so I made this design. And this design is very minimal, it's not very pretty, it's got big clown shoes and a squirt flower, it's a demo. And when I do demos for an idea, I exaggerate. One of the nice things about having your own site, which everyone in the room should have, doesn't have to be popular, you don't have to be a blogger, everyone should have their own site. It's like having your own sketchbook, right? You wouldn't try to do UX without having a sketchbook, or at least a piece of paper and a pencil. And then for what we do, everyone should have their own personal site. Doesn't have to be popular, you don't have to work on it very often, but when you need to make something and you want to be unconstrained by typical client or organizational constraints, the thing with that, like I decided, before this, my site was about like showing off all the different things I could do as a web technologist. And my navigation was super fun and clever, and I had sidebars and all this stuff. And I got rid of all that. And you can't really do that with your client. You can't really do that with your day job. You can't really just get rid of everything just as an experiment. If you have a personal site, you can experiment with that. And then based on what you learn from that experiment, you can bring that thinking back to your day job, right? So I took my site and I made the type huge, and I removed everything, starting with navigation. No nav, no sidebar. Eventually in the footer there's some navigational links, but I had the good fortune to have a personal site, and the main thing at that point that people were doing with my personal site was reading it. Not a lot of people, but a few people were reading it. So I thought, I'll make it easier for them to read. Let's see if this works. And I did this exaggerated design, and the first thing people said was, that type's really big. And I said, oh, good, thank you. Then they said, your type's so big, I had to sit back from my monitor. And I said, oh, thank you, fantastic, it's working. And people didn't understand what I meant. They said, there's something wrong with your CSS, I think, because everything's too big. If you need help with your CSS, I'm like, I often do need help with my CSS, but in this case I don't. This is what I wanted. And I said, okay. So I wrote a post, in which I called a manifesto because it's a fancier word. And I basically said, thank you, I know my site's got big type, and I did this for this reason, and this is what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to achieve readability. Thank you. And it got a little press, which was cool. For my ego, and also because it meant the idea would spread. And meantime, Mike Pick and I were working on a list apart and redesigning a list apart for the new world of, different tablets and lots of responsive sizes and all that. And we decided to make it big type and minimal and remove everything we possibly could that was extraneous. And again, it's my site, so I can do that, but also we could still give readers everything they needed while removing a lot of extraneous stuff that we had thought they needed, but they really didn't. We even managed to keep ads in it, but still be very minimal. And then as a joking nod to the whole big type thing, Mike made the logo way too big so that it would blow out of the screen. And so we got a lot of people saying, there's something wrong with your CSS because your logo is too big for the page. And we were like, exactly, thank you. And so again, we had to write a letter. I always like explaining design is like explaining jokes. It's, you know, like maybe there's something wrong, but we were doing something new and pushing. And then a funny thing happened. Medium came out, and it came out of the gate with a big type design that was minimal, with lots of white space and unusually large type. And I'm not saying that Ev was going, I think I'll make a product because I like Zeldman's blog. That definitely didn't happen. But I think these ideas were in the air. We were all aware of the iPad and Kindle. We were all aware of readability. We were all aware of how cluttered and ugly our pages were getting and how hard they were to read. We were all looking for an answer. And we all started sort of figuring out that maybe there was this other path that web design could go. Instead of how much can you fit above the fold, how much can we remove? And in so doing, make a better communication that slows people down and is easier to comprehend. And then the New York Times did it. Look at that. Big type, lots of white space, big pictures. And then the Washington Post did it. And when I say and then, I'm not saying literally the next day. The Washington Post might have done it first. I don't really know. Like around the same time, these things started happening. And this is the Washington Post tablet version, aesthetically beautiful. Here's their web version, less pleasing aesthetically in my personal opinion, but you have more compromises on the web, I get that. And still, it's still doing that same thing. And then it didn't stop there. This is the New Yorker. Now to understand, for some context, the New Yorker was founded in the 1920s by a group of Algonquin Round Table wits, like Dorothy Parker and the little guy with the mustache who's in a bunch of movies. Not Charlie Chaplin, the other little guy with the mustache. Anyway, and it's very staid and conservative in its presentation. For example, they hyphenate today. And when they write the word cooperate, they put an umlaut over the first O. In other words, they do typographic things that people did in the 1920s. They still do that in 2019. They're very tied into their heritage. It's part of their charm. It's part of their brand appeal. You can think of it as twee or pretentious or annoying, or you can think of it as charming. They don't really care. It is what it is. That's their brand. And yet, they did the same thing. Giant type, big hero image, lots of big margins. And then, opposite from them, this is ProPublica, which is an independent journalism source. They frequently collaborate with news organizations. They are funded by donations. They don't have advertisers. They don't have sponsors. And they also started experimenting with big type and all these same features. And they added one new wrinkle, which was art direction. If they had a very important article, they would art direct it differently from the rest of the paper. In this case, they gave it a black background or dark background as opposed to the white background of the rest of the site. They used different fonts. They used an illustrator and a specific style, and only for this one story. Okay? So, what are the elements that go into making a readable experience that these publications that I just showed you have in common? First of all, they have big type, right? Typographic hierarchy. When you're doing more with less, when you have fewer elements on the page, when you don't have as many columns and pop-outs and gray backgrounds and rounded corners and beveled things and this and that and the other, then the type really has to work. Same as when remember when Apple used to make the calendar look like it was stitched with leather and you could see where the cow had been sad, and all these things it was very super photorealistic almost, like it was like Pixar animation, right? And then they switched to something very minimal, where they basically put everything in Helvetica and just used font size so you could navigate the calendar. Wasn't always successful. The first version of the calendar was pretty awful because they went too far. But it's that thing you do when you're trying a new design direction, where you go too far and then you start pulling back again, right? It's called iteration. Everybody knows this, everybody in this room. And everything we do digitally is never finished. It's a move in a direction, and then you pull back. So hierarchy, very important. Minimalism, less is more. Remove everything extraneous. There's a design game where you basically look at something that already exists and try removing things from it until it doesn't work anymore, and then put back the last thing you removed. And that's how you improve it. At the company I work at, we have lots of software, and the software is aging, and there's lots of problems. And so we'll go in and look at something, and as an experiment, just start pulling stuff out. And does it still hold together? It usually becomes easier to use until it suddenly breaks, and then we put back the last thing we took out, right? I forget what that exercise is. It's a design 101 exercise, but we forget, basics are great, and we often forget about them. Art direction and white space. So these are the 5 things: big type, hierarchy, minimalism, art direction, and white space. Big type and hierarchy are the driving forces in this template I made for the Pointer Institute, and have open source for your pleasure on GitHub, and I'll talk more about it in a moment, but it's basically a starter theme, if you will. It's a typographic starter theme. The Pointer Institute works for newspapers, and my thought was a struggling newspaper with a limited budget could take something like this and rethink how they do their page and improve the readability of their experience. I was talking about ProPublica and art direction, so I should step back and just explain art direction a little bit. This is my canonical example of what art direction is. In 2003, who remembers SARS? Okay, so basically after 9/11, it seemed like the world was just falling apart every 5 seconds. And one of the things that happened a couple of years later was people in China were dying from this mysterious airborne illness. Nobody knew what it was. They called it SARS, and people were putting these masks over their face. And so there were all these startling and disturbing news photos of like 500 people at a train station all wearing masks. And The Economist did a lot of research on it, and they wanted you to read their article. So their art director put together a canonical propaganda image of Chairman Mao. Now, if you don't know who that was, he was the leader of the Communist Party from like the 1930s until he died in the 1970s or 80s. And he was a dictator. But there were propaganda pictures of him all over China. And he was a beloved figure, at least in the communist world. And he was not a beloved figure in the capitalist world. And The Economist is kind of a capitalist magazine. So they decided that if they took this, the art director decided that they would make something happen in your brain. They would put 2 images that were unrelated together and make something happen in your brain. So they took this propaganda image of Chairman Mao and put a SARS mask on it and put it out there on the newsstands, and like everybody who saw it bought the magazine. Because, again, there was one image with its inherent meanings, a second image with its inherent meanings, and the combination of the 2 produced new meanings inside the person's head, right? That's art direction. Another example, Volkswagen did an ad in the 80s during the gasoline crisis, or the 70s, and it showed Dom Marino, who was an art director I worked for early in my career, had done this ad. Guy was putting a cartoon, a guy was putting a gas pump to his head. But it looked like a gun, it looked like he was committing suicide. And the headline was, maybe the economy's trying to tell you something, right? And so the headline and the visual worked together to create a new meaning, and the gas pump, people figured out, I don't think people would make this visual joke today, in today's environment where people are more sensitive about this, but then it was sort of like you were supposed to be shocked and laugh at the same time, and that's art direction, right? That's putting ideas together visually. And graphic design is what colors should we use, what typefaces should we use, what's our line height, and all that. And we do both. But we rarely get to do art direction on the web, but when we can, it's very powerful. And if you have a particularly important story on your website, you actually should give yourself permission to art direct it. Right now, of course, there's an Illustapart article about art direction on the web. Just Google art direction on the web, a list apart, and you'll get to it. And Andy Clark has written a book about it. It's a terrific book about art direction on the web. It's beautifully laid out as well. It's on Smashing Press. It's a smashing book. It's fantastic. It's beautifully done, and he also has a video series where he talks about art direction on the web. If you're interested in art direction on the web and you think you'd have the opportunity at your job to try it, then these are good resources to check out. And I can't go on talking about art direction on the web without giving credit where it's due. Derek Powazik had a site called Frey in 1996 that did art direction on the web, where every story, it was a personal storytelling website. So kind of like diary entries, but that were written for an audience that made a point. The canonical example to me, the one I remember, he did someone wrote a piece about their first theatrical experience, how nervous they were, stage fright, all that. And Derek art directed that one using frames. Does anyone remember frames? Frames from the 90s? Okay, so frames were you could take, they were like sliding divs, but you could take a piece of content and open it up, and he made these curtains. And basically, you parted the curtains to start reading the story, and the first part of the story was set on some other curtains, and you parted those curtains to read the next page, and you kept opening the curtains, like curtains opening in a play, the way there's multiple sets of curtains. And that was art direction for the web. It's very time consuming. It's very hard to do. Jason Santa Maria, who I worked with for years, and I have a publishing company with him, A Book Apart. Jason Santa Maria, for a while, was art directing his blog. So every post he wrote had a different look and feel, which is awesome, but it's also something to do if you don't have a day job. Once you have a day job, you can't really do that. So it's very hard to do art direction on the web. It's only to be done in special circumstances when you have the time and resources. I will say it's getting easier. We almost have the tools to do it with less labor. Snow was one of the first big art-directed pieces on the web, the New York Times. They spent 100 hours programming these various effects, and someone I work with just recreated it in 3 hours using Gutenberg blocks in WordPress. Now, they didn't recreate it perfectly, and that last 10% might still be 20 hours of work. So I'm not saying that what people, but when the New York Times did Snow, nobody was doing art direction on the web except for Jason Santa Maria and formerly Frey.com. So they put 100 hours in, and they're the New York Times, they could afford to do that. What I'm saying now is that it takes fewer resources. We have better tools for creating web experiences. So the day will come when we can really just art direct individual stories. And then the trick will be to not go overboard and not art direct every story, because if you art direct what's the thing from The Incredibles? When everybody's special, nobody's special, right? That's from The Incredibles. If we art direct every story, people won't realize it's a special story. So you want to reserve it, okay? Now we're going to talk about whitespace. And there's two kinds. There's the kind you think of when I say whitespace, and there's this other kind that you might not think of. As always, there's an List Apart article. This one is by Mark Bolton from 2007, and in it he talks about macro whitespace, which is big whitespace, the kind of whitespace you think of. Here's what our old List Apart layout looked like, and it didn't have the red in it. The red is something we added in code to show the whitespace. Basically, it's like when the dentist does that thing where they put dye on your teeth to show you if you have cavities or something, like your teeth are purple, or where there's plaque buildup. That's what it is. The dentist gives you a tablet, and then you got these purple spots on your teeth, or you don't because you have perfect teeth, but I never had that. And the purple spots show the dentist where the plaque is. So the red is the plaque. The red is the white space. And white space conveys a feeling of luxury. And it's a chicken and an egg thing. I don't know whether it conveys luxury because luxury brands use it so much, or whether luxury brands use it so much because there's an inherent mental thing that happens when we see an uncrowded space. We think of crowding as the conditions we live in. Crowded bus, crowded train, crowded airplane. I can only fit one cheek at a time in the seat. right? Like everything's super crowded, and that's the sad fact of life. And then this other thing is this luxury. You see a rich person's home, and they have like these huge living rooms and everything. I think we associate wide open space with luxury, and it's less and less part of our heritage. It's our heritage, but it's less and less part of our daily experience. When you go to Chanel, you know that you're going to spend a lot more for your makeup, but it's okay because they have white space. It works. In fact, the Apple store, most of them were very white. They looked like Kubrick film sets. And my favorite thing is when my daughter was about 6, I took her to an Apple store in Soho, and she said, "Are we at the airport?" And I went, "Oh my God, they do look exactly the same." And I guess airports are trying to make you feel relaxed. They don't. They don't, but so they're the exception that proves the rule. And this is a design company, Sofa. They've since been acqui-hired, so that this says "We Are Sofa." Now if you go there, it says "We Were Sofa." But I included the URL, it's in the show notes. But they used a lot of white space to show that, basically, that they designed sites for luxury brands. Without telling you, we charge a lot. They were basically saying we charge a lot, but that's okay because you're the general manager of Tiffany and you expect to pay a lot because you're also going to charge a lot. Or you're Chanel, you expect to pay a lot because you sell dresses that cost $5,000. And so, you know, HTML ain't going to be free. And these folks, like I said, I bought this phone because, well, my friend had one and she was very happy, but also my existing phone, which I liked a lot, was just way too slow, and also white space. I have to admit, I went here and I was like, let me just sink into that white space and see how much I can spend on a phone. So that's macro white space, and then there's micro white space that Mark Bolton talks about in the Solicipar article, which again, go there for more detail, and it's in the show notes. But it's for one thing, it's like in line height, right in the leading. You have white space you don't think about, but it's in the leading. And it's also in the letter forms. And this is like one of my favorite design stories of all time. Eric Spiekermann is a German type designer and magazine designer. He's in the movie Helvetica. He's the guy with the German accent that's named Eric Spiekermann, and it has his name there. That's him. And he had designed The Economist, I guess, in the 80s. And The Economist came back to him in the 90s or the early 2000s and said, Eric, you did such a fantastic job designing our magazine, but now we want to modernize. We want a completely open feel, and we just want the magazine to feel much more modern and open. So you have permission to throw out anything you want. You're the designer, you're the genius. Blue sky, baby. Eric Spiekermann. There are no limitations, there are no constraints. Give us a new design that really says, hey, it's 2003. And so he changed the font. He took his own font, which was thick, and he recast it to be slightly thinner, which put a whole lot more white space into the design. I'm going to show you that little animation again because it's so cool. He took his existing font. This isn't it, by the way. This is a demo. This is not his font. I picked a font that would really show you how this works, right? So he took the font and just kept opening it up so there was more light showing through in the characters and in the little curls of the characters and in the spaces between characters, and said, here you go. And they bought it. And I love that story. I want to do that someday. I want a client to say, blue sky's the limit, and then I want to go like make the tiniest change possible and then get a bunch of money for it. I think that would be great. But it tells you like the power of design and the power of white space. Now, white space and hierarchy are in the Pointer Style Guide, which is online for your pleasure. And you can use that, grab it, use it to make your own templates, experimenting with type hierarchy. It's also fun if you're using Sketch or Photoshop or Figma to make a web page, but you still want to have the feeling of what the type will really be like. You can make the columns of type using something like this in CSS, so you have what it actually looks like in a browser, and then you can take a screenshot and plug that into your Sketch file or into your Photoshop file. More useful in Photoshop than Sketch. Sketch and XD really want you to set the type in their app. So what have we learned? We learned that everything is about getting the customer to lean back. If we want them to learn, if we want them to slow down and comprehend, we have to get them to lean back. And we do that with, say it with me, we do it with big type, hierarchy, minimalism, I can't hear you, art direction and white space, and two more things. I'm doing a Steve Jobs here. Oh, and one more thing. That was Steve, I'm better than him, I got two more things. And two more things. Your content should be branded and it should feel authoritative. Unless you're making a site for kids, it should feel authoritative, and I'll explain why. So first of all, branded. When all sites look the same, all content appears equal. And if you look at something, I call this the Facebook problem. Not the Facebook problem that's in the news, another Facebook problem, which is that a rant and a well-researched argument look exactly the same in Facebook. Everything looks the same. A link to a reputable journal and a link to a disreputable blog look exactly the same. Everything looks the same in Facebook. So when you get out of Facebook, when you get to your site, it should be whatever it is. The Washington Post doesn't look like any other paper. The New York Times doesn't look like any other paper. Any good site should be branded, and that brand should be authoritative. It should convey that you really put a lot of time and effort and thought into it, right? Because you did. And if you don't believe that's important, I call your attention to the Trajan mystery. The Trajan mystery. Trajan is a font based on the letters on the imperial arch of Emperor Trajan. If you've been to Rome, it's near the Colosseum. It's awesome. The Romans not only conquered their known world, obviously there were other parts of the known world that were known to the people that inhabited them. I don't mean to dismiss the experience of those people or denigrate them in any way, but the Romans only conquered what they knew about, but they went around conquering, and they looked fabulous doing it. They didn't just conquer. They conquered wearing these big gold suits, and they looked super cool, and they made monuments to themselves so that people would go, the Emperor Trajan kicks ass. Not only did he come back with diamonds and tea and all kinds of other stuff from Egypt and everywhere, but he also made this big stone monument to himself. He didn't do it. Slaves carved it out. Let me tell you something. When you're carving a marble arch, you don't get to iterate. And you can't A/B test a marble arch, okay? And if you're carving a marble arch, you've got some oiled dudes, some really big oil dudes, who today would be action stars, but back then they were slaves, going like, boom, boom, with chisels. And chisels don't make dainty little letters. They make very impactful letters. And a type designer was looking at it in the 70s and said that would be a great font. And she made this font and called it Trajan, and every movie uses it. Like every serious movie, I don't mean like every Adam Sandler movie uses it. I mean like any movie where they even hope to get an Oscar, they set the name in Trajan because they feel like somewhere there's a dim Jungian ancestral memory of what those letter shapes mean. Somewhere you just know that stuff kicks ass, that stuff is serious, right? So authoritative. Now if you're interested in news, if you work in news, I have a little article called To Save Real News. It talks about what I think would help just in terms of visual design, right? So one more time, here are the tools of our slow design toolkit, because I like to repeat things because it helps me remember. So big type, hierarchy, minimalism, art direction, macro and micro white space. Your product should be branded and it should be authoritative. That's what I came to talk about. That's slow design for an anxious world. I'm here I'm here for the next 3 days. I'm here at lunch. I'm here at the happy hour. You want to talk to me about any of this stuff, please feel free. And if you're shy and don't want to talk in person, slip into my DMs. What? Slip into my DMs. I'm at Zeldman on the Twitters. Thank you.